It's Monday, October 24th, 2016. The time, 2:45 a.m. Pacific Standard. The show, it's the Field Goals Instant Reaction Seaside Chats podcast with Kenneth Arthur, and that's me, Kenneth Arthur, instantly reacting as instant as possible to the Seattle Seahawks 6-6 tie against the Arizona Cardinals in Week 7. I don't know how to react instantly to something like this. I had never seen anything like it before, and neither had anyone else. This was truly one of the most unique games in NFL history, perhaps the most unique game in Seahawks history, and definitely will go down as one of the most memorable games of the year, if not the last decade. Whether or not it was a good football game or played well by both teams completely over the course of 5 quarters, a certain, not a thing that you thought could be possible, 5 full quarters, but there it was. And here we are left with the Seahawks at 4-1-1 following a tie, and the Arizona Cardinals at 3-3-1. Certainly the prospect of a loss is much worse than that of a tie, though the Seahawks did have a chance to win this one outright, and they blew it. But luckily, so did the Cardinals, and arguably the Cardinals blew it much harder. And I'm not reminded of any game at all. This is the lowest scoring tie since the NFL switched the tie rules in 1973 to include overtime. If you go back, you can find a 7-7 game in 1997 between the New York Giants and the Washington Redskins. That game featuring Danny Cannell, the quarterback for the New York Giants, and Gus Frerotte, the quarterback for the Washington Redskins, splitting time with Jeff Hostetler. And that one going into overtime and ending in a 7-7 tie. That one had 2 touchdowns. This one had no touchdowns. This game had 4 field goals total by each team. And how about this? They go into overtime tied 3 apiece. There were 4 real drives in overtime. A field goal made by the Arizona Cardinals, followed by a field goal made by the Seattle Seahawks, followed by a missed field goal by the Arizona Cardinals, followed by a missed field goal by the Seattle Seahawks. That was overtime, not including 2 plays for, 19 meaningless yards by the Arizona Cardinals to end the game. Up until that point, this was a game of incredible defensive stands, more so, I think, than terrible offensive performances. The drives went as such, of course, across the whole game, and it's easy for me to do this. I would never normally do this, but it's quite easy. Arizona punt, Seattle punt, Arizona punt, Seattle punt, Arizona punt, Seattle punt, Arizona blocked field goal, Seattle punt, Arizona field goal, Seattle punt, end of half. Seattle punt, Arizona downs, Seattle punt, Arizona punt, Seattle punt, Arizona punt, Seattle punt, Arizona blocked punt, Seattle field goal. Arizona punt, end of half, a.k.a. end of regulation. Arizona field goal, Seattle field goal. Arizona missed field goal, Seattle missed field goal, end of game. That was what we have seen tonight, or Sunday night, as the great Carrie Underwood says, "Oh, Sunday night." Or as she used to say, we were waiting all day for a Sunday night. And then what turned out that tonight, we were waiting all night for a Sunday night as well. And ultimately, the Seahawks and Cardinals delivered us some interesting football, to say the least. The Cardinals put up 443 total yards of offense, but just 6 points, no touchdowns. The Seattle Seahawks defense was out there for 46 minutes and 21 seconds, and they did not give up a touchdown. That's in large part thanks to Kelsey McCray, the safety starting in place of Cam Chancellor, and Earl Thomas, the safety starting in place of Earl Thomas, I suppose. And that's sort of the 2 plays that they had there, as well as one more goal line stand on David Johnson on the following play. The Arizona Cardinals there was no opting or ability to challenge, and it just didn't happen. So they ran the next play, and you thought for sure that the Cardinals were going to get it in and end the game, but they couldn't. Catanzaro comes out, and fearful of another blocked field goal perhaps, or fearful of his coach, maybe even more so than he was of Wagner, Catanzaro missed the kick. Steven Hauschka, I don't know what he has to be afraid of, but certainly there's something that the Seattle Seahawks and I think the fans should be afraid of with the great and lovable Steven Hauschka, which is that he has had some terrible misses over here over the last couple weeks. A blocked extra point attempt, a miss, and here we go again with another miss. And of course, it cost the Seahawks a chance to win the game, but they do come away at 4-1-1. Just one loss through 6 games, and the Seattle Seahawks, they have a good chance still in the NFC to get one of those bye weeks because they tied and didn't lose. Even if they had lost, they'd have a pretty good chance at it, but not losing is very important as well. And as of right now, they are in 3rd place with their 4-1-1 record, and in the NFC West have a 2-loss lead over the Cardinals. So a pretty significant, tie for Seattle. And although Patrick Peterson and Bruce Arians in the Arizona Cardinals sidelines was able to celebrate last, kind of because Hauschka was the last one to miss, really a tough loss, a much tougher tie for them. Still don't know what to do. So you want to call it a loss, you want to call it a win, but you can't. It's what it is. It's a tie, the first in Seahawks history. And they celebrated the fact that they didn't, ultimately blow it as bad as they could have. But definitely the Arizona Cardinals, I think you have to come away a little bit dejected, I think, if you're a Cardinals fan, and a little bit pumped up if you're a Seahawks fan, because of the way that the defense was able to perform at a time when the offense wasn't able to do anything at all. The Seahawks had 11 first downs in the game. They were 3 of 14 on 3rd down. They ran 57 plays to Arizona's 90 plays, and they had 4.5 yards per play. And the Arizona defense, they would only have to be out there for about 60% of the amount of time that their counterparts, the Seattle Seahawks defense, had to be out there. And, they held Seattle to 4.5 yards per play. But the Seahawks, going out there for so many more plays, 90 plays, held them to 4.9 yards per play. So it was really a punch for punch, except the Seahawks had, to defend almost twice as many punches. And they were able to do that with the help of Earl Thomas and Bobby Wagner. Thomas right now, these last 2 games, playing like a defensive player of the year candidate, which is so encouraging, especially after the first few games where people said there's something different about Earl Thomas now and the Earl Thomas that we've known before. I was, pretty adamant about, not worrying too much about it, just because we did have such a long track record of how good Thomas was. So if he was going to be, taking a turn for whatever reason, schematically, or, maybe there was an injury or anything like that, we'd at least give him the benefit of a season before discounting, the entire body of work that he put up in his career since 2010. And I think clearly Earl Thomas is playing lights out right now, and it showed in Seattle being able to hold on for a tie in this incredibly difficult game. I was just watching the whole game, and at a certain point, I think at the whole time I had sort of thought at some point the Seahawks were going to score a touchdown, and maybe the Cardinals will too, but at some point the Seahawks will. So, it's not like this whole game is going to be just like this, which is just a tug of war and a back and forth and, nobody getting advantage over the other. I didn't think that could happen for 75 minutes, but ultimately that is what happened. And at a certain point, just thinking, okay, resign myself to the fact that Seattle very well probably will lose or could lose, because what kind of a team can withstand that many body blows on defense over and over and over again when the offense isn't getting off the field, or when the offense isn't staying on the field and is constantly putting their defense under that kind of pressure? Something that, Pete Carroll's defense really hasn't had to face that many times since 2012, when he got Russell Wilson and when Marshawn Lynch really, those two paired up together. At that moment, the offense was doing their part. And, I think that in like 2011, when the defense was starting to come together with Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas, being able to see them, get better, but really, having a hard time carrying the offense, in the same way of a Denver Broncos last year. And I think something that you're seeing with the Minnesota Vikings this year. And this was really I think, a testament to how good the Arizona Cardinals defense really is. Number 3 in DVOA going into the week. The Seahawks were number 1. So these were two of the top 3 defenses in the NFL, according to Football Outsiders, and that's really what you got. And with the Cardinals being without John Brown, the wide receiver, I think he could have, definitely made a difference for Arizona to a degree. Certainly, when Michael Floyd, the wide receiver for Arizona, has to step up and make bigger plays, we saw him have a huge drop in the game and is not the reliable, trustworthy player that a guy like John Brown is. So that certainly made a difference. And Seattle just could not protect Russell Wilson, and they could not get open. The wide receivers could not get open consistently against the Cardinals' really good defensive backs. And that's what we got, was this back and forth. And I just thought, well, it's nice of them to hold on for 3 quarters. But eventually, the Seattle defense will let up. And what we saw in that fourth quarter, at a time when, Richard Sherman slips and J.J. Nelson is running down the field, and at that point you start to think, okay, that's it. That's the game. The Seahawks have lost, and Kelsey McRae runs him down, and you're like, well, good for you, man. This is your second start, and obviously, I don't think anyone's going to quite give up, but good for you for making a play, even though it's not going to make a difference. And then the Arizona Cardinals don't just, there was questioning whether the Cardinals at that moment were going to just do like a Carson Palmer knee to the right or the left of whatever hash mark Catanzaro wanted. But they actually tried to score. So they gave the ball to David Johnson, trying to catch maybe even the Seattle defense off guard, not expecting it, running to the outside. And then he's running to the outside going, okay, there it is. That's when the Seahawks are going to lose, because he's going to punch it in, and he looks like he's about to. It looks like maybe he even did get it in, but Earl Thomas, much like he did against the Rams a few years ago, comes in and prevents him from scoring by literally, a fraction of an inch, a hair. I mean, it's that close, and you think maybe they're going to look at that play again, but they don't. Immediately run another play. He's going to punch it in again. But he stood up, and he's not going to punch it in. So you know what? If you're going to do this, kick the field goal. Figure it out there. This is an easy field goal. There's no way you're going to miss it. Bobby Wagner, having leaped the offensive line earlier in the game and blocking a field goal by Arizona legally, obviously that was something that we thought, well, maybe again, it happened once, but they're going to be ready for that, right? So then he does it again, legally. Doesn't get the kick, but Catanzaro's thrown off. The field goal hits the upright. Bada bing, bada boom. The Seahawks are back in business. Looks like they are going to now be the team that walks off with a field goal. And Hauschka straight on, couldn't have a more straight on shot. And maybe that was part of the problem. Who knows? Just straight up shanked it. And there you go. The Seahawks and Cardinals finished 6-6. 6-6 tie. So Russell Wilson's game held to just 6.1 yards per attempt, but that really went up as the game went up, because he was doing absolutely nothing through 3.5-4 quarters. He was all around under 4 yards per attempt. So he really got a lot of those chunks in the overtime going to Jimmy Graham. He finishes with a pass rating of 81.5, no touchdowns. Christian Michael, 16 carries for 52 yards, 3.3 yards per carry. Didn't get his longest run, I think, until overtime of 10 yards. And, did okay, but I wouldn't say there was anything especially special. I would say that it's difficult to assess much when the offensive line is just getting winning no battles, against the defensive line of the other team, I think. So I think Christian Michael, maybe a higher performance or a better player like a Lynch, does get a lot more in those situations. But Michael, that's what he got out of it. So, and another thing will be I think the knee injury to Bradley Sowell, the left tackle. He goes out of the game. George Fant comes in and, isn't really highlighted a bunch. So I would say that Fant probably did a decent job, especially for a guy who was still pretty new to the position. And, we'll see if he starts next week against the Saints. Doug Baldwin, 6 catches for 69 yards, relatively quiet, but then made some really nice plays, had a long of 27. Jermaine Kearse had a big catch of 31 yards. He finishes with 51. Jimmy Graham has 5 catches for 53 yards, though it comes on 10 targets, and he has at least a couple drops. CJ Prosise returning for the first time since week 1, has 2 catches for 17 yards. I wouldn't say he made a huge impact, but in this game, with who did really on offense for the Seattle Seahawks, Tyler Lockett just 2 catches for 13 yards. Didn't get a lot of attention. Paul Richardson 1 catch for 10 yards. Tanner McAvoy had a big 10-yard catch that sets them up for the field goal that sends them to overtime, and also the punt, the blocked punt. So then, another huge thing about the special teams here was the blocked field goal, the blocked punt, throwing Catanzaro off of the game-winning kick that would have been. Obviously, just some huge special teams plays for Seattle in order to set themselves up for the tie here, which is about as much as they could have hoped for, given the amount of pressure being put on their defense and the amount of nothing getting done by the offense. And Russell Wilson had listed with 2 fumbles here, but none of them lost. Bobby Wagner, 13 tackles, just playing some of the best football of his career. He's hit new heights. KJ Wright had some huge plays in this game. He has 10 tackles. I think, Wagner and Wright, 2 of the best, linebacker tandems in the NFL right there. I don't know if what the sentence I just said makes a ton of sense, but it is now 3:02 a.m. Giving some time on this weird-ass Sunday night game to really think it over, and also some of the other work that I had to do that you can check right out there on fieldgoals.com. Deshaun Shedd, I thought, played really well. How can you find players? Okay, I was just about to say, how can you find players on this defense that played poorly? But Jeremy Lane, really had some moments where when the defense was playing so well and so historic, almost blew this game on, losing his cool, which is like totally inexcusable. There is, nothing that can, give you a reason to, especially in a game where the Seahawks really cost themselves opportunities to win it because of penalties. Anytime they got a drive going offensively, it was called back because of penalties. Every single drive felt like it started on 1st and 20. And then even on defense, when you're in there, Jeremy Lane, losing his cool, almost getting penalties that could set up the Cardinals for another field goal attempt at the end of the first half. There was a lot of times where, what are you doing in there? And I think that I had also read on Twitter that Jeremy Lane was pulled from the slot so that the Shed could cover Larry Fitzgerald. And I think that there's just, for a guy that just got a pretty big contract without a lot of experience in his career, you would hope just at least is, using that energy and that anger to fuel himself to play better on the field and not to put himself in the intention and the eyesight of the refs to potentially draw flags that could cost them the game. So there is that. Kelsey McRae playing really well in the absence of Cam Chancellor, with the game-saving tackle. Frank Clark and Cliff Averill come out of this with 2.5 sacks. Averill has 6.5 sacks on the season. Frank Clark has 5.5 sacks on the season. So both of those guys on pace for double-digit sack totals. I believe that Michael Bennett is still on pace for double-digit sack totals, though he has none on Sunday night. And Richard Sherman, I think, played really well. DeAndre Elliott had a great play on special teams. Earl Thomas just in a phenomenal game, and he's a phenomenal player. So there's a lot there to really like about the way that the Seahawks played this game on defense, and hopefully can continue to improve on offense as they have for most of the seasons under Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll. Get better as the season goes on. It happens pretty much every year that they play much better in November, December on offense, and that's how you see them explode from a good team that is sometimes frustrating to usually a great team. And you'd like to see that happen. Obviously, Thomas Rawls could be coming back in a few weeks, and I think he's going to add another dimension to the offense that Christian Michael can't. And I think, hopefully CJ Prosise, I really still believe that as he becomes healthier and is able to contribute more, could really be catching a lot of balls out of the backfield and making a pretty significant difference on offense when he's healthy. So don't forget to wait out for Rawls and Prosise to not just get healthy, but to be at 100% and feel comfortable and ready to be a part of the offense. And I think that when that all gels together with Doug Baldwin and Jimmy Graham, hopefully Tyler Lockett as well, and Paul Richardson and Jermaine Kearse, there's really going to be something special there for Russell Wilson. I think the interior of the offensive line is still playing pretty well, especially compared to the last, couple years. And Afidi and Justin Britt and Mark Lewinsky can hopefully, continue to get better, and hopefully the tackles continue to get better as well. But defensively, you got to be super stoked. Field goal, special teams outside of the Stephen Hauschka field goal, super stoked. You got to be happy about that. The Seattle Seahawks get to go, if they need another offensive explosion, or if they need an offensive explosion to sort of, and I don't mean to use the term offensive explosion. It sounds gross coming out of my mouth, but it's what happened in the moment, and I can't take it back. But if you need to see the Seahawks put up points, they play the New Orleans Saints next weekend, and an opportunity to play perhaps the worst defense in the NFL. And that's an opportunity for, Jimmy Graham to perhaps, put up a lot of yards against his former team. Russell Wilson, I think, draws a lot of reasonable comparisons to Drew Brees and the sort of the same ascension in his career as a Drew Brees. It's not just a height thing, but maybe it is, but I think that, preparation and, strong arm and accuracy are good reasons to compare Wilson to Brees and, have them on the same career trajectory as Wilson also passes more and more each year, just like Brees has. So I think there's something there to watch, except that Brees is going to be going up against the Seattle defense and Wilson's going to be going up against the Saints defense. So hopefully that's a win for the Seattle Seahawks and not a tie. Though, you got to say, anything that's not a loss is better than a loss. Is that something that's been said by Yogi Berra yet? It was a pretty good game. It was pretty interesting. At the end of the day, I'm not upset. And I am happy that the Seahawks have such a historic defensive performance and come away with not a loss. So the Seahawks moved to 4-1-1, play the Saints next week. This has been the Instant Reaction Podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes to Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur to get this in your iTunes or podcast or iPhone, whatever, every week. Stay tuned, throughout the week for 3,000 NFL mock drafts with myself and Rob Staten, where we'll talk about the draft, but also the Seahawks. And then maybe later in the week, a preview show of the Seahawks and the Saints on Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. Of course, lots of coverage on fieldgoals.com. This has been a Seaside Chat. Thanks for keeping it breezy. I don't know. I don't have an outro.